In this final video on financial statements, let's look at some, yeah, just finer points, if you will. So one of the types of analysis that we can do is something called common size financial statements. It's quite simply, it's just you take a number, for instance, on a balance sheet, and you divide all of the line items by total assets. So it tells us the relationship of assets. So, how much of the company's assets are in inventory? What's that percentage of the total purchase? It also can look at liabilities, right? What percentage of debt is the long-term debt, etc. Income statement, we can do the same thing. And here we can look at the control decisions made by management, right? How much of the sales are cost of goods sold as a percentage? Is that stable? How do we compare it to an industry? So here's a real quick little example of an income statement version. So here's the cost of goods sold. And if you look across the line, we're right around the 60% range. So it's fairly stable that it costs roughly 60% of sales go towards paying for the product, producing the products of the company. Is that number good or bad? Well, it's stable. It's not going up. It's not going down. How does that compare to the industry or to our competitors? That's the next question we would like to ask. One of the things I find a little peculiar is income taxes. If you look at income tax down here, you see that the income tax as a percentage of sales is confusingly very small, right? It's like 2%, 3%. But this is not the tax is not as a percentage of sales. Tax is as a percentage of pre-tax income, earnings before taxes. So again, it's just a different way of kind of looking and understanding. We see that it's relatively stable, positive, so that means we have positive income every year. We can do similar analysis by looking at percent change. How have these things changed over time? And of course, we can do this quite simply on a balance sheet or on an Excel worksheet, just by using the formula where the ending value divided by the beginning value minus 1, that will give us the percent change in that item from year to year. It's nice to know whether we're trending upwards. If we're looking at sales, what is sales growth? How has that been? Is it stable? Is it continuing to grow? Another example of something is something referred to as the DuPont equation. And the DuPont equation is actually a very valuable tool if you're trying to understand how the cumulative effect of decisions helps a corporation. So the DuPont equation says, look, what are the components of the return on equity, of the profits that are earned by the shareholders, right? Return on equity. What is there a composition we can look at? Or said another way, how can management increase return on equity? Well, there are 3 things that we want to look at. Expense control, that's profit margin, right? If you want to get more return, you have to increase profits. Asset utilization, if you want to increase returns, you have to do things more efficiently. And then the third one, which is sometimes a little hard to understand, is debt utilization. If you want to increase returns to owners, you have to increase debt. And we've talked about this a couple of times in some other videos, right? The idea here is if instead of using shareholder money, you use creditor money to do good projects, those good projects provide profit above and beyond the cost of debt. So if that cost is more, if that benefit is more, who gets the benefit? It goes to the owners. So their return should increase when we borrow money to do good projects. So how this works together, the return on equity equals the net profit margin times total asset turnover times the financial leverage multiplier. And you can see here how this sort of works. Net income divided by sales times sales divided by total assets. Sales divides out. Total assets divides out. So in the end, this is net income divided by common equity. But now we can look at three distinct decisions that management makes to try to understand how they can increase profitability for owners. And here, if we look at cores, we can see that they've had some decline, right? At 10.5 was a pretty decent return. How did this happen? How are we getting this decline? Well, if you look at efficiency is pretty stable, doesn't change much. Financial leverage multiplier. You see that the financial leverage multiplier is going down, right? If the leverage multiplier goes down, that means return on equity goes down. Is this okay? That particular part of the strategy, that is Core's strategy. They don't mind borrowing money, but they want to get out of debt as quickly as possible. The thing that is ultimately affecting return on equity the most, though, is the net profit margin. That they have a declining net profit margin over the last 5 years. There seems to be a little bit of a rebound, but we do have some issues with this, with the company. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the Altman formula, the Altman bankruptcy formula. There is a video here. If you get a chance, it's also in Canvas. You can go watch this video. It does a pretty good job of describing the variables and how this works, right? So in the end, there is a formula. So we have working capital divided by total assets, EBIT divided by total assets. That's our basic earning power ratio. Sales divided by total assets. That's our total asset efficiency ratio. We have return on, retained earnings divided by total assets. Market equity divided by total debt. This is kind of our market to book ratio of sorts. There is a formula. When you calculate this formula, as you see, we have numbers here in the low ones. So what does this mean? So how this works is kind of like a regression equation. It's trying to predict, given your company's financial ratios, what's the likelihood that you're going to go bankrupt or not? If this number is greater than 3, there's very little chance of bankruptcy. If this number is less than 1.8, there is a good chance of bankruptcy. Or at the very least, there should be some major concern. Banks use this all the time. Think about all the loan applications the bank gets, right? It would take they would have to have an army of people to go through all of those financial statements and all that data to approve loans. So what they'll do is they provide or look at a Z-score. Now, statistically, or Z-scores are published for different industries. So the Z-score for retail would be different than the Z-score for car dealerships, right, or auto manufacturers. Even within the retail, right? So the Z-scores of grocery stores is going to be different than the Z-score of coffee shops, right? So these numbers are very specific to the industry, and they help us to understand. Again, banks use this. So what the bank will do is they'll say, look, if you come in and your score is greater than 3, no problem, you get a loan. If your score is less than 1.8, no problem, you don't get a loan. No questions asked. So that means the company, the bank, only has to be concerned with those folks between the 1.8 and the 3. So it narrows down the work that the bank has to do in analyzing the companies themselves. So it's a very convenient way of predicting what happens to companies. So there are some potential problems and limits of ratio analysis, though, right? Companies are not in isolation, right? If you think about Molson Coors is involved in microbiology, farming, mining, right? They have a supply chain within the corporation. So it's pretty difficult to pull out a company and say, well, I want to analyze the brewing company, because there is no true brewing company really all by itself, at least not the big players. Seasonal factors certainly can affect ratios. This is why we don't look at quarterly data. We look at annual data. Window dressing techniques can mess us up. So what's window dressing? We talked about the current ratio where you might have to have a 2.0, right? So if you don't have 2.0, you're not even going to get, I'm not even going to look at your work. So what you might do is say, okay, what if I go out and I borrow long-term and pay off some of my short-term debt? I haven't done anything for the company except maybe convert it to an interest-bearing loan instead of a non-interest-bearing loan. But now I've cleaned up my current ratio because now the current ratio is at 2.0. Again, there's lots of ways we can maybe try to play games, and good financial analysts are always looking for those things. What about different types of accounting practices, right? LIFO, FIFO. There are ways, techniques in the financial analysis world to adjust for all of these. So when we talk about qualitative factor, what does that mean, right? How good is the data? Well, there is greater risk in the numbers if most of your revenue is tied to a single customer, if it's tied to a single product, or if you only have a single supplier, or a high percentage of your business is overseas. That adds levels of uncertainty. What happens to you if your customer gets in trouble? What is the competitive situation in the industry? What kind of products are in the pipeline, right? How's our research and development going? Are there any legal and regulatory issues? All of these things add quality, right? They help to assure us that the data we see and how we analyze it is sound. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.